recently I was meeting up with a writers group, and one of our members quoted someone that she couldn't remember who had said it, but the quote was, "Life is too short to hate doing something you love." And that kind of hit me because I'm like, oh shoot, I do kind of hate writing a lot of times, but it's like one of my favorite things, and I shouldn't do that. Like, that's not the point of it. The point is, the artistic creation and just the adventure of it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Artists of the Way. I'm John, your host. Today is an exciting episode because I'm joined by my wife, Lynn W. Francis. Obviously, my last name is not Francis. That is her pen name, which we will be referring to her as throughout the length of this episode.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. I'm very courteous. Lynn is a poet, author, painter, sometimes actor. What else do you do, hon?
I enjoy being outside. I enjoy hanging out with friends. Social butterfly, I guess.
A social butterfly.
Outdoors woman, I suppose,
Yeah.
would be the name of it.
Fantastic.
Artistically, though, that basically covers it.
Cool.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah. We have just recently surpassed the 1-year anniversary of Lynn's book, which is Me and God Locked in a Room and Only One of Us Has the Key, which is a really awesome poetry book about our relationship with God and a lot of the difficult things in that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk a little bit about what your relationship with God was like throughout the process of creating that. I'm really excited about that. First, I have a couple questions that I ask all my guests.
All right.
Quiet bird. There's a bird outside. We're doing a different setup today, so we're closer to my windows so you can hear the sounds of nature a little more.
Perfect for an outdoors woman.
It's great. So, what are you working on right now?
Artistically or just in general?
Artistically.
Artistically, right now, my very loving husband has threatened me that he is going to publish my novel that I have been working on for the past 7 years if I don't do it myself. So right now, I am working on that. I've had a manuscript for probably 4 years, something like that. Which is awesome and amazing, but now, I started writing it in high school, and so there's a lot that I need to fix. I need to completely rewrite the ending, which is a bummer, but I think we'll give it a lot stronger way to end out the book, and I need to rework some different characters, things like that. So it's a lot of work, and it's a little daunting, but I am hoping to have that finished before the end of the year, at least this draft finished before the end of the year, so that I can give it to my beta readers. They can give me some feedback. I can implement that and hopefully, tentatively, be moving forward with that sometime summer of next year.
That's exciting. Cool.
Thank you. I'm excited about it too. It's
Yeah.
been a long time coming.
It has been. Mm-hmm. That's exciting. As you've been working on that and other artistic things, what are some ways that you feel like God has been speaking to you or engaging with you through your art?
That's a good question. I would say a lot of it is, I don't know, I guess about discipline right now. I am not an ambitious person whatsoever. I have a lot of dreams and goals, and usually I am content if I do not reach those dreams and goals. I'm good to be where I am, which is why I've had this manuscript for so long. But I feel like through my relationships, encouraging me artistically, I have been growing a lot in, rededicating myself to it, applying myself to it, working on just the work of it. A lot of times writing for me feels, especially with the novel as opposed to poetry, which is a lot more short form, with a novel, it feels a lot more like work. And when I'm doing something that I love, I don't want it to be work. So then that kind of butts up against why I'm doing it, and I get frustrated. So a lot of just patience, I guess, and application, and just, kind of getting through the slog of it to get to the other side where it like will become fun again, basically.
Yeah, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like there's something to be said about a theology of work amidst that, in that like we are made for work. So I feel like there can be a beautiful melding of the two, of like a passion and love of something, or like of a hobby and a work for it. But I feel like you have to work to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like what's the passage about, like finding joy in your work and like working with a joyful heart and all of that. Recently I was meeting up with a writers group, and one of our members quoted someone that she couldn't remember who had said it, but the quote was, "Life is too short to hate doing something you love." And that kind of hit me, because I'm like, oh shoot, I do kind of hate writing a lot of times, but it's like one of my favorite things, and I shouldn't do that. Like, that's not the point of it. The point is, the artistic creation and the just the adventure of it, and need to get back to that. So I think that's something that God is working in me right now.
Yeah. And I do feel like, oh darn, I lost my abstract thought. It was like right there.
Oh no.
You sound very insincere there.
Oh no.
No, I feel like even in the like working of it, right? Like you're living into what God made you to do in writing, and B, the way he designed us, because we were designed like with work in mind. Like even before the fall, we were working in the garden. We were tending to
Naming
things.
the animals. And
Gardening a whole lot. There just weren't thorns, which was better. Or
maybe the thorns just didn't hurt.
That's true. Got a poke and it was like a little tickle. And you were like, why? Threw it away. No, that was weird. Moving on. Let's talk about your book.
Okay.
Being God Locked in a Room. And only one of us has the key. It's been out for over a year now.
It has. It's craziness.
Yep. How does that feel?
It feels good. It's a little strange because came out last August. August, I think, was it 4th, was the big release party at Baker Book House. And leading up to that, for maybe like 6 months, I think it was a lot of compiling and rewriting and refining and organizing, and the formatting. Oh, I self-published. And the formatting of a book. I'm hoping that the novel will be easier, because that's just one big long stretch of text. But with the poetry book, there are all these little fiddly things, like different, I can't remember the name of it, but like when you make a picture with your poem, there's a couple different ones that I have that are arranged in a very specific way to work with the poetry, and figuring out how to get that from my notes app on my phone into a document that could be then made into a book was just incredibly frustrating and took a very long time. So leading up to the release, it was a lot of work, and then the release of it was just like absolute like adrenaline and celebration and joy and excitement, and was this huge thing where it's like, oh my gosh, I did the thing, I did the thing I've been wanting to do since I was a tiny little child, and I made a book, and it's here now. And then after the event, things just got really quiet. It wasn't like a huge critical success or anything,
right.
It isn't like people across the world are reading my book. I did have I was very lucky to have some people across the country, at least, who did, and many friends and family who had recommended it to different people or gifted it. And so I heard a little bit of feedback about that, but it was just kind of quiet after that for a really long time. And that was a little hard, because it felt like, oh, we had this big lead up and this big exciting thing, and now it's just quiet. But I mean, it is poetry. It's faith-based poetry. It's self-published faith-based poetry. It's very niche.
Niche within niche within niche.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that isn't entirely unexpected. Maybe
Right.
a little bit of a letdown, but I didn't do it for like the acclaim or whatever, you know?
Right.
So that was fine. But so getting to the year anniversary of it, it's a little strange because I've had so many other things going on, and kind of forget about it sometimes. Like
Yeah.
it's something that I did and now it's over,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Like getting to the year anniversary of a show isn't really
Mm-hmm.
a landmark in any way. But then it just occurred to me while I was home a lot over the last few weeks, I'm like, oh, hey, it's been a year. That's crazy that so much time has passed. And I don't know, I guess it feels good that like it still exists, you know, even though maybe people aren't talking about it very much, like it's still out there.
Yeah.
You know, it's still on people's bookshelves. It's still available to get. You know, I have a stack of them in my office. There's some at our favorite coffee shop, The Stray.
Check it out. It's a great
You
coffee
can
shop.
check it out. It's amazing. So it still exists and it's out there and it has been for a whole year. And that's one of the really cool things about books in general is just like once you've written it, it exists, you know, like there's no unexisting it unless it's like a Library of Alexandria situation and we don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I feel like that's a difference because I think in general with art, like I feel like it is a lot of like, there's like excitement of initial idea and then there's work to actually make it a thing. And then there's like elation that you did it. But then once you've done it, I feel like a lot of times it just goes out there in the ether and you don't really know what it did. But with books and like music a lot of times, as opposed to like a performance art, like its life continues past just the memory, but it like is now something that you've birthed that is alive and kind of like a child now has its own life out there separate from you,
yeah, and it
but
just
still
kind
is
of
doing things as God wants it to.
and like to think like I don't know, it's a self-published book, but there's you know copies out there now and like years down the line after I'm dead, like if the book itself, like a physical copy of the book survives, you know, it can get passed on, it can end up in somebody's library that like their kids discover, or maybe it gets donated to a library, or it ends up at a thrift store and then goes on from there, you know, like it could live a whole life. Like there's a quote from Matilda by Roald Dahl, which is always makes me cry anytime I see it. But it's like about how authors send their books out like ships on the sea, and then they just kind of go and forge their own journey there, like you were saying. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
That is cool. Do you feel like in sort of this I don't know, second or third phase? Keep adjusting my mic. I'm sorry if you're hearing bumps. Do you feel like in this sort of second or third phase of the book, I don't know, is there like a special memory now that the work on it is done and it's just out there? Do you have a special memory or moment you treasure of seeing God in it, or just something that was like affirming to you through the book now living in other people's lives?
There have been a few. One of our close friends came over. I can't remember what the occasion was, but we ended up talking about the book because I wanted to pick his brain on it a little bit and see what he had thought of it. And that conversation was really special because, you know, he was talking about the different ways that he had related to it, and he had realized, oh, I'm not alone in feeling this, you know. It's not just me, and I'm not, I don't know, weird or sad or anything, you know, because someone else is out there experiencing the same thing, and it's okay. And that was a really special experience as far as God working in me. Just putting the book together was kind of a revelation. It was really weird because I had printed out. I started going in. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a poetry collection. I didn't really know what the collection was going to be. I just decided that I was going to make one. And I knew that one day I was like, okay, I could make a poetry collection about like romance. I could make a poetry collection about friendship. Those are two things that I have many poems about. I could make a poetry collection about God. I could make a poetry collection about, whatever. So I printed out all of my poems, which there were hundreds. And when I say hundreds, there are not hundreds that are good. There are hundreds that exist. So I printed them all out and I sorted through them all. And I'm like, okay, these are the ones that actually have potential. And these are the ones where I woke up at 2 a.m. and wrote something on my phone and then went back to sleep. And when I woke up, I didn't remember what it went. So I printed all those out and I sorted through and kind of put them into categories of like what they were about or like what they could reflect and move forward from there. And I'm like, I really think this like faith-based or like religious one, this one about God, has the best collection, the most solid idea behind it. So I'm going to go for that. So I picked out the ones that I thought were the best, that were my favorite, whatever. I didn't have a specific, I guess, method to it. I just kind of picked them and arranged them in a way that made sense to me.
Yep.
And then just ran with it. And there were a few that I wrote for the collection as well that I was like, I think we really need another one between these two, or like we need to like flip these around and like make this one longer or put these two together into one. And I realized, I think it was after I had the book itself, I want to say, like after I had gotten like my first author copy to proofread and make sure that everything printed right and everything, I was reading it, and at this point I've read these poems hundreds of times, and reworked them so many times. I think I'd gotten so close that I wasn't able to see what had happened, which was that there was like a very significant pattern of them. Like in it starts out in this really kind of like almost hopeless place, and this place of religious angst and discomfort in the relationship with God, distrust in God, and it grows through that into like kind of an examination of sin in our world and in us. And then from that, it turns into almost like prayer or supplication, like several pieces about, like trying to reach out to God, or God trying to reach out to us. And then from there, it turns into praise and just the joy of the relationship, of the healing there, of just everything like kind of culminating. And it doesn't disregard anything that's happened already, but because of what's happened already, you can see how that hope has survived. And I just, reading it ministered to me. Like it was, reading it, I felt less alone. Even though I was the one who had written it, it almost felt like I wasn't. Like it was a piece of art that I was experiencing for the first time, or not even necessarily for the first time, but really like it spoke to me, and I felt the presence of something beyond myself in the words, which was an incredible experience. And it really brought home the fact that I'm not the only one writing these words, like God is working through me and in me, and it's not just for other people. I've seen this post on the internet. It's probably from Tumblr or something that I've just seen reshared many times, but it says, in your life, you like to make a good life or something, like you only have to save one person, and it's okay if that person is yourself. And like, I don't know if I completely agree with that statement, but I think it's true that like a lot of times we get, especially like as artists or as Christians, you know, we get so focused on doing things for other people, or maybe it's just like whatever Enneagram number I am. I don't know. But you get so focused on doing things for other people or for God, you know, or for XYZ whatever, and you forget to take care of yourself, or you forget that this can minister to you as well.
Yeah.
And I definitely am that way too. And I saw in that, I was like, well, dang, you know, like God is here for me too. And I made this, but it's still speaking to me.
Yeah. Do you feel like there were particular ways or particular poems that God used in either that moment when you reread it and the Holy Spirit kind of spoke to you through it, or as you were working on that? Do you feel like there were specific poems or moments or aspects that God like ministered to you in? Like, was there a particular thing he kind of shared in that? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I'm just trying to think.
Mm-hmm.
Two come to mind. One is the poem Serpentine, which I wrote for the collection. I realized I was like, something is missing and it needs a poem about this. And I don't have a poem about this, so I need to write a poem about this. And I was very salty about it. And it's about, it's kind of like that people with, I think, like anxiety can relate, or just people who have anxiety in their relationship with God. But it's that thought of like, okay, if this God made the world and there's so much pain in the world, how can I trust him? You know, and it's one of those that I was talking about, the formatting, because it's formatted like the curves of a snake as it's slithering along, and that's not by accident. But so I had to write that poem, and I remember I was sitting in a coffee shop in Holland eating a donut, just steaming because I was trying to write this poem, and I was just having a heck of a time. And it was hard because it is a emotion that like I feel a lot of times. It's one of those things that like I have to wrestle with as a believer, of like, why are things this way when they don't have to be? I think even non-believers wrestle with that, you know, like, what does it all mean? You know? But I was sitting there and I was wrestling, and I realized part of what was making me uncomfortable is I was very much like, I want to do this for God. You know, if I'm making this collection about my relationship with him, about his love for me, about all of this stuff, like, I can't be doing it for myself. You know, I have to do it for him and for, like, I don't know, just, I guess, that unspecific other person, you know, like, I have to do it not for myself. And writing this poem felt like such an attack on God, basically, which it was a very honest emotion. Like, it's something that I struggle with. I know other people who struggle with it too, but like, being in that space with God was very uncomfortable for me, of like, I'm writing this poem about how I don't trust you and you're right there, and it's making me uncomfy. You know? And there weren't like words spoken. I didn't like get like a certain sense from the spirit or anything like that about it. But I felt like I had to do it, and it wasn't like I have to do this to like prove my prowess as an author. Like, I had to write it because it belonged there in an artistic sense. I think you understand. Like, there are things about a piece of art that you don't necessarily like, but you need to have it because it matters to the story.
Yeah.
And it was one that I really had to like fight with myself to get that to work. And I guess it kind of opened up that door of like, it's okay if you're not happy with God all the time. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to have those feelings, but it's important to like talk about it. Because if you just like let it fester, like
then resentment grows.
And and it's like pushing the beach ball down in the water. It'll go,
It's a God-sized beach ball. It's a God-sized. That's too big a beach ball.
I can't push that under the water,
Weakling.
But so there's that. And then there's a poem called Cycle, which is a poem that I actually wrote on my Instagram page. I'll do like prompt requests where I'll put out and I'll be like, hey, do any of my followers have something you want me to write a poem about? And then I'll do my best to write a poem about that. And sometimes I'm not good at it. But it was a prompt from one of my followers. It was like, I want you to write a poem about cycles. And I was like, okay, well, that's really vague, which I love because then I can do whatever I want with it. Mm-hmm. And it became one of my favorite poems I have ever written. And it's about how everything happens at the same time. If you've seen the movie Arrival, I know it's one of your favorite movies.
If you haven't seen the movie Arrival, you should see the movie Arrival.
It is really good.
It's so good. One of my top 10 favorite movies. Go watch it after this episode.
Well, I mean,
and then tell me what you thought.
You could.
It's only like 2 hours. I'm sorry, I totally derailed your point.
It's fine.
So Arrival.
So if you've seen the movie...
Oh, are we about to spoil Arrival?
No, I'm not about to spoil Arrival. If you've seen the movie, you'll appreciate this. But something that I feel about life in general and the nature of time is just, it kind of goes in kind of a circular motion, it isn't linear. I always picture in Avengers is it Endgame or is it Infinity War where Tilda Swinton does the whole like thing.
Endgame
and they go like that.
Why don't you picture the spaghetti bowl from Flash?
See, that's more like what I'm saying. So like if you've seen Flash, we're gonna get on a different subject here. It's like all the things that have happened like in the past and in the future and in the present, like they're all kind of like mixed together, and they all like affect each other. And time has this secular nature. And so that's what the poem's about. And about how, all these bad things happen in life and it sucks. But also all these good things happen in life and you can't necessarily, it isn't that you can't have one without the other, but no one thing is the end all be all.
Right.
There's always something good coming again and there's always something bad that's gonna happen, but they even out and turn into this kind of cycle. And I cry every time I read that poem because that is something that I need to remember as just a human, because I get very focused as a depressive, anxiety-ridden individual. I get very focused on the bad thing that's coming. And I'm like, oh, no, there is a big traumatic event that's going to happen and I'm going to lose everything that I love and I'm going to be all alone and all of that great stuff. And I need to be reminded that there's something good coming too. Even if all that terrible, horrible stuff happens, that's not the end of the story. The story keeps going and there's going to be more good in it. And maybe it's just a tragic backstory. You haven't even gotten to the plot of the book yet, And I just need to be reminded of that personally. So writing that and then rereading that anytime I read it, I'm just like, oh, I needed to hear that today. Even if I read it every day, twice a day, I'm like, oh, I needed to hear that today, because it's just something I need to hear all the time. And I think that that's really a gift that I got from writing poetry in general. But then now that it's been immortalized in this collection, writing this collection too.
Yeah. Hey friends, I hope you're enjoying today's episode. I just wanted to pause for a moment and let you guys know that if you want to stay up to date on everything that Artists of the Way is doing, the best way you can do that is by signing up for our email newsletter through our website. That newsletter is going to go out every 2 weeks with the podcast. It'll let you know when episodes are posted. It's going to give you some thoughts that I've been having over the last couple weeks on theology or art or whatever God's working on me on. And it's also going to be the best way for you to get updates on what Artists of the Way is doing. We have some really exciting things in the works outside of just the podcast. God's been doing some really cool things, and I am super stoked for what they're going to be, but I can't share them just yet. But if you want to be among the first to find out what Artists of the Way is doing in the next year, sign up for that email newsletter. Visit our website at www.artistsoftheway.com. Scroll down to the bottom of our homepage. You can sign up for the newsletter there. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the show. I'm curious, with writing the collection, is there anything that you would point out as like a unique thing to the creative process of assembling a collection? Because I feel like, because poems are like a short standalone thing. A novel is a lot, and huge.
You're not wrong.
Same with like a play or a painting. And I feel like this is kind of the same with like albums too. They're a collection of a bunch of smaller pieces of art, but a lot of times like they in and of themselves as a whole are also the piece of art. I don't know. Do you think there's anything unique in the process of forming the collection as a piece of art as opposed to a small poem or a large tapestry of a story that was planned out that way from the beginning?
Sure. So, writing one poem, just one piece, for me, a lot of time is almost a reflexive habit. Like something will just pop into my head, or I'll feel inspired by something, or I'll be like, I want to write a poem about this. And I'll just go for it. And then I'll just kind of set it down and not think about it again. With doing the collection, that was something where I had to put a lot more thought into it. Like you mentioned, like with the novel, right? Like there's been this huge plan since like day one, and that plan has changed a million times. But there's always been a plan, because if you don't have a plan, your characters are just wandering around, and then sometimes a story will happen, but it might not. Yep. And so you have to think about, okay, how does this piece go into the next piece, And I love reading poetry. Something I don't love as much, I've discovered, is when it's like the collected works of X author, because then it's really just, a lot of times it just feels like, here are all the poems they wrote about their wife, and here are all the poems they wrote about birds, and it's like they're just kind of all plopped down together without regard to, and I don't know, I've never arranged one of these collections. This is how it'll feel reading it, at least. It'll just kind of feel like, here are all the poems they wrote between like 1903 and 1904, and it's like, but they don't have anything to do with each other, so like you're reading it and you're like, oh, like here's a really good poem about an afternoon they spent on the lake, and then next it's like, here's a poem about their wife who's dead now, and it's like, all right, I guess that's how we're doing things. And then it'll just be kind of like this it just feels like a bunch of things pushed together.
Yeah.
Writing a collection, you have to think about, or I think you should think about, the story that it creates outside of the poems. Like originally I had poems selected to be in this collection that eventually I cut out because they just didn't fit. Not because I necessarily even thought they weren't good enough or that I don't ever want to share them, but it's hard to explain because there isn't a main character, although I guess it's probably either me or God because we're the two in the title, but there isn't like a main character with a name.
right.
who you follow through the entire thing. There isn't, an inciting incident. There isn't any of
Right.
the fun plot stuff happening that would happen in a novel or in a movie or in a play or in anything else like that. But there is a cohesive story. You follow the ebb and flow of it, and each piece leads into the next piece in one way or other, whether it's like subject matter or whether it's tone or whether it's rhythm, whatever it is, it makes sense in a way, the way that it goes.
Yeah, and I remember you talking about when you were putting it together. I think this was you. Maybe it was me, and I'm putting words in your mouth.
Oh, well, that's fine.
There was it felt like there were like 3 characters in it that were developing throughout, which was me, and then you with a lowercase y.
Yes.
And you with an uppercase y, and me was obviously you. This is about to get real confusing.
Getting
Me
real
was
cerebral
you.
here.
You was...
The character of me
was Shay.
Me.
Or the reader, I suppose.
Yeah, it was like the reader. It was like a self-insert for
Yeah.
myself, but then it could be for anyone else. And then the you character...
With a lowercase y or an uppercase y?
With lowercase I.
Okay.
Lowercase y. This is getting confusing.
I know.
The lowercase you was... Oh, gosh. Was it you?
Sometimes it was me. It was
Sometimes
mostly...
it was
It
you.
was
It
just
was
like whoever
It was like
other human
another
was there.
human.
Yeah.
Another person doing whatever they do in the story of
Sometimes if the person in the poem did something really egregious and horrible, it was probably me.
You didn't do anything egregious and horrible in this collection. Maybe in the romance collection when we get there, but it's fine. And then you with a capital Y was God, right? Yeah.
And so you're kind of tracing. I feel like I remember you like thinking through, okay, where are these 3 characters going from one poem to the next to kind of piece it together.
That's true. I had even kind of forgotten about that. It's been a year, friends. It's been a long time.
That's why husbands are here to help remember. I forget way more than she does. Except for when it comes to lines. I'm good at memorizing lines.
I only forget lines sometimes.
I'm not saying you're bad at it. I'm just...
You're not bad at it. I'm just better.
I'm amazing. I'm going to go repent of my pride after this podcast episode. That's cool, though. I'm curious. I think you've had a fair few people, at least like amongst our friends, read this who don't usually read poetry. And so it's been a way for some people who don't usually engage with poetry or find poetry exciting or interesting to get into poetry. What do you think it is about poetry that is important and resonant to the reader?
Sure. Well, well, I haven't seen Dead Poets Society, so I don't know. It's like Robin Williams, right?
Yeah.
I don't know his big speech, because that would probably be really fitting here. Maybe you should just get like a clip of that and just put it in. About
Editor John, put in a... No, I'll get copyright.
Yeah, don't get copyright infringement.
Yeah.
But, so go research that on your own time, viewers of the podcast / listeners of the podcast. Because I feel like I've seen it and I was like, yeah, but then I forgot because I haven't seen the movie. Which we should probably watch, by the way.
We should. I've seen it before.
You have?
I saw it at Dad's, so that meant a lot of times the heat was up high and I didn't hear all the dialogue.
Okay, well, let's watch it again. 'Cause I feel like the dialogue's probably pretty important.
I
Robin
remember it
Williams
being
is
good.
just always amazing.
Robin Williams is...
Anyway.
Yeah.
Poetry can be difficult to get into, I think. I remember as a young person going to the library, and we would pick out just masses and masses of books to take home and read, and because that's what you do when you're homeschooled. So
I dabbed, for the listeners who don't know why she just started listening. I dabbed.
I don't know why
and
you
it
dabbed.
was because I'm a homeschooler and we took home a lot of books.
Okay.
The dab was glorious.
Anyways. So
sorry, guys. You're just getting a snapshot of what Shay and I do at our home. So this podcast is a little more chaotic than most of the
in
episodes.
my everyday
You
life.
suffer. Not only are you seeing a slice of life, you're seeing me be ripped apart by my wife live on it. Well, not live. Anyways, I'm interrupting your question.
You
again.
are. What else is new? Anyway.
I hope you all find this entertaining.
If you don't,
all my
I
listeners
am
just
so
start
sorry.
unsubscribing. They're
They
like,
hit
the
that
podcast
15-second skip like 100 times.
it's gone downhill, man. It used to be better. And then
Anyway, okay, let's do this. So, poetry can be hard to get into, like this conversation, but I remember as a kid in the library, I would be looking at like titles on the shelf, you know, and I would be like, oh, this sounds super cool, and I'd get it down and be like, wow, what a dope title, like Me and God Locked in a Room and Only One of Us Has the Key. And then I would look at it and be like, poems, aw, shoot, and I'd put it back. Because who wants to read poetry? I wanted something with a story. I wanted something interesting. I wanted an adventure. And poetry just didn't seem like that to me, to read a whole book of it. The individual poem I really liked. We did a few courses on poetry, and we had this book that my mom read us of poetry, and there's a lot of poetry in the Lord of the Rings books and in The Hobbit, you know, and just like books in general from like that era, especially. I feel like a lot of times they would just be like, and now it's time for a song, and so you'd have a song randomly. So I knew poetry and I loved poetry and I enjoyed writing it, but I didn't ever really want to read it. I don't know how that makes any sense, but that was how I felt.
I mean, it makes sense. I'm bad at reading novels, and I'm writing a novel, so
yeah, not ideal situation.
not ideal.
But
I try.
I know, it's okay. You're getting better.
It's
getting better.
I got better.
Anyway, but what I think is important about it is it does something, it makes you think in a different way, because there's so much analogy and simile and, you know, all these just weird things happening in it, especially if you've read E.E. Cummings, you know, like his poetry is just like, what's going on? Half of these words are splattered like blood across this page, and I can't like understand. So it's like a little puzzle you have to solve to even be able to read the poem. And it's just a very different form of writing. Most of what I do is free verse.
Yep.
It's kind of unstructured. A lot of times it reads more like just, you know, a story or something like that, which I think is a little more accessible, which is probably something that, like the friends that we have who haven't read tons of poetry, like maybe something they find more approachable about it is there isn't so much weirdness going on. And it's kind of more like, especially I remember a couple people coming up to us like at the event and being like, hey, I don't read poetry, but like this made sense, you know? And I'm like, oh, cool. And I think maybe part of it is because of that. And part of it is because of the subject matter. And part of it, I think, is maybe people don't realize what poetry is, you know? Like me as a child being like, oh, I don't want to read that. That's poetry. That's stupid. But like, what are 80% of children's books, you know, what's Dr. Seuss, you know, like those, you know, like it's poetry in a different way, but it is. What are like the little like notes that you write someone you love, you know, that are just like, oh, you're okay, well now I'm thinking of Shakespeare. That's not a note you write someone you love. What's Shakespeare, you know? Like it's, would that I wear a glove on that hand that I might touch your cheek, you know? Like, it just can be so many things. And I don't even remember what the original question was now, so I'm just kind of rambling.
Ramble away.
Okay. So, really, I feel like you have to read it to kind of know what it is and to find how it's important to you. And some people just aren't into poetry. And that's fine. There's enough poetry just in life. You know, you don't need to read it to experience it. Like, it's just out there in the world. I just feel, as being a writer, I feel the need to try to capture it and put it down so that other people can understand it in the most abstract way possible, as poets do. And I don't know, I guess it's important because it makes you think in a different way, and it makes you notice more things. Like, I think if you read poetry, even if you don't enjoy the poetry, like, there have been some poetry books that I have read that I have just been like, what is happening and why am I here, and I want to leave.
I think one of them's probably on that bookshelf. That one you got in Colorado. That we thought was going to be super cool.
Yeah, and then I was like, ugh,
yeah.
what is this? My poetry isn't
What
like
was
that.
it called? God. It had the word God in it, so we were like, this has to be awesome.
Well, I don't know if that's what's true.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You put God's name in something, and it automatically will be great. You don't have to worry about telling a good story, or
this is not the truth. Don't listen to him. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question? I kind of got away from the question.
No, it does.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good
Cool.
to know.
So, we are getting close to our wrap-up time here. This has been great. I'll have to invite you on again so we can have more conversations, because
we don't have enough of those already.
We never talk. No. To
you
save
can't
our
tell.
marriage, we'll have you back on the podcast.
It's like a very high-stakes game show every time I'm here. Like, are they going to repair their marriage, or is this podcast going to end and everything fall apart?
Gosh, that would be so weird. You just like podcast every discussion you have as a couple.
I feel like that'd be a really interesting concept for a fictional show.
Yes.
And then you could, like, grow the characters.
Some sadistic producer is listening to us and is like, reality TV show. Let's ruin a marriage. Anyways.
Isn't that normal reality TV shows?
Not always marriages. Sometimes it's families, lives, other generic aspects of life. This isn't about reality TV. This is about art. Let's get back on the topic, John. Okay, so resources.
Yes.
If somebody's wanting to grow in their faith or grow as an artist or maybe explore poetry. I feel like I said explore weird there, but we're going to move on.
You just roll with it.
Roll with the explore. What?
Nothing.
Okay.
What did you say?
Roll with the explorer.
No, what did you say before that? What are you asking me?
I'm so sorry, guys. This is easily the most chaotic
He just
episode
gets
I've done so
flustered
far.
when I'm around.
It's true. Anyways.
What are some things that I would suggest for
Yeah,
artists
some resources for people to grow in their faith or grow in their art, or who would be interested in exploring reading some more poetry and trying to dip their toes into that?
Sure. So if you're a Christian and you want to explore some poetry, I know it's been suggested on your podcast before, but the Psalms is a great place. Job, Lamentations. I feel like there's one that I'm missing. I don't know.
Some of the prophets have some poetry in there. Song of Songs.
Yeah, Song of Songs, that's a good one. It's got some really strange imagery, but, you know,
It does, but it's also pretty
anyway.
almost R-rated for the chillins out there.
Moving on. So I would suggest, you know, starting with the poetic books of the Bible.
Yeah.
Because then it's 2-in-1, poetry and Jesus. There are a lot of Christian authors out there who've written some excellent poetry. Madeleine L'Engle has a collection, The Ordering of Love, that I really loved. It's got a lot about just love in a lot of different ways, and then some like poetic retellings of Bible stories, like, which I thought was really interesting. Like, cool. I think there was one like by Sarah, of Sarah and Abraham, that was really interesting, and like so many that just made me cry, and some dealing with like the loss of her first husband and second husband. I don't remember. She's had a sad life, I think.
Yeah. Like,
reading this book, I was like, oh my gosh. So that's one that I would suggest. C.S. Lewis has a great old big book of poetry I was gifted last year for Christmas that I have yet to begin because I forgot I had it. But I love his other writings. I'm very excited for that. In general, I love Ogden Nash. E. Cummings, I mentioned earlier, is great if you're looking for a puzzle of a poem to work out. Ogden Nash is just funny. He does a lot of cutesy and like clever rhyming in his work. Jack Prelutsky, I think I'm saying his name right. He does a lot of like children's writing. It's him and Shel Silverstein I grew up with. Where the Sidewalk Ends, a classic. I think Jack Prelutsky did did he do Scranimals? I'm getting confused. I don't know. There's just a lot of really good stuff. Edgar Allan Poe, the original emo boy. I love his poems to death. They are just so good. There's a couple weird ones. Yes.
Because emo.
Yeah, because emo, you know. His are fantastic. Shakespeare's sonnets, you know, there's tons to read. Just jumping in, maybe like a good way to get started would be like with a collection like, oh, here's love poems by like 100 great love poems or something like that. Or just looking for those collections. You know, I find a lot of poetry on Instagram that I love. Oh, Andrea Gibson is a good one. With button poetry, there's just tons of like Instagram poems that I have found and fallen in love with. Wendy Cope I found on Instagram, and her poem about an orange that also makes me cry every time I read it. Just there's tons. I could go on and on and on. I probably shouldn't because we're getting to the end of the episode, but just try it is what I'd say. Because
and every like poet has a really different style too.
They do.
So
like just because I love, you know, Edgar Allan Poe doesn't mean everyone will, because he talks a lot about death.
Right.
And is pretty okay with that, seems like, but you know, maybe you want more cutesy poems, so then you could go find Shel Silverstein and read about children's interpretation of the world, because I feel like that's how he writes a lot.
Well, yeah, and like I've been dipping my toes into Wendell Berry. I have my big Wendell Berry poem book.
Yeah, those ones I've read a few, and those are really good too.
But like, I just feel like every poet has such a distinct style that I feel like it's hard to be like, oh yes, I like poetry as a blanket statement. I mean, I'm sure there's people that do, but I feel like for the average Joe, if you're like, I don't like poetry, you may just not have found the poet that resonates with you yet.
Exactly. It's like, you know, anything else that you try for the first time, like wine or cheese or whatever, like you might not like a certain one, but you can like try other ones and you can say, oh, well, hey, maybe I do like wine and cheese after all. Because there's amazing wine and cheese out there.
That's true. All right. Thank you for coming on and being a guest. This has been great. Where can people go to find updates and what you're doing and follow you?
Sure. So I do have a website, lynnwfrancis.com. You can go there. I have a contact page if you want to get in touch. If you just want to kind of follow my artistic pursuits and whatnot, I do have an Instagram and Facebook. I'm Lynn W. Francis on Facebook, and on Instagram, I'm Fervent Ink, Fervent_Ink. You can find me there. That's usually where I'll like post, you know, all my poems that I've been working on lately. Instagram, you can typically, you know, submit prompts when I will do that. And if you're looking for my book, you can either get in touch with me, or there are some copies for sale at The Stray on Division Avenue. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get involved.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for being on, Shay. This has been awesome.
This has been really fun. Thank you.
Yeah.